There are 3,600, and they are taxed at a rate of 50.2%. 10 years later, not 3,600, 62,000. Not taxed at 50.2, taxed at 24.7. Okay. If you want to talk about welfare. Okay. Now, why? One other thing. I'm sorry. In terms of health, and I just saw Marian Wright Ellman, by the way, talking about because this Children's Defense Fund just did their report, so she was on CNN yesterday. So none of this has changed. But in any event, Tufts did a study last year, in October of last year, Tufts University in Massachusetts, about child poverty rates. And what it says in this is that the poverty among all of those groups studied, and these were African American, Latinos, and whites under the age of 18 years of age, that poverty among those groups had increased by 47% over the 20-year period of the study. And then it said that growth rates in poverty among white children will surpass those of blacks if the current trends persist, which is also what the Children's Defense Fund just came out in their study with. The head of that study, Mr. Larry Brown, at the Tufts Center on Poverty and Hunger, said there is no industrialized nation that has the degree of child poverty that we have. And the last thing on this, I do a lot of cartoons. I mean, I read cartoons like Calvin and Hobbes, and I'll do Dewsbury and all that stuff. But I also clip political cartoons. So this is from the Village Voice. And it has a mother who is supposedly a welfare mother, suckling one of her many children, at her breast. And it says, it's all her fault. The welfare mother, a parasite on the economy. She caused the S&L collapse, And she was right in the middle of that defense fraud scandal that wasted billions. Remember those $500 hammers? She headed that department. It was her overinvestment that caused the real estate bust. And that whole decade of junk bonds and leverage buyouts that shot our economy to hell, she had her fingerprints all over that one. You'd probably still have your job if it wasn't for her. Doesn't it feel better now, knowing whom to blame? Okay, now why do I raise that? Because again, it was always the sense in the movement that you were supposed to have worked to make the world better than it was as you go out as it was coming in. Now, one of the people, when I talk about this, who had this guiding principle, is another woman who was very, very serious in the movement, and that was Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer. She's a sharecropper on a plantation in Mississippi, in the Mississippi Delta. And in 1962, SNCC workers go to see if she, Bob Moses and a couple of other people, to see if she will try and register to vote. And they go under cover of night because she's on this plantation. And she says, yeah, she's going to try and put her name down on this list. And she goes down, she comes back to the plantation and is told that unless she takes her name off the list, told this by the overseer of the plantation, that she is going to have to leave the plantation. And in fact, she says, no, I'm not going to do that. So they throw her off the plantation. She goes into town and stays with a family, friends of hers. And within the first 3 weeks that she's there, 16 shots are pumped into the house of this place where she's living. Well, that happens in 1962. 63, 1 year later, she's coming back from a voter education workshop at Highlander School, folk school in Tennessee. And she comes back along with 3 other people. Annell Ponder from SCLC, Uvester Simpson from SNCC, and 14-year-old June Johnson from Greenwood, Mississippi. And they're coming down, they have crossed state lines, and they get to Winona, Mississippi. And they think, because of a recent ICC, Interstate Commerce Commission ruling, then in fact they are protected, that they can sit wherever they want to. So they don't think they're testing anything. They sit down at this lunch counter, and again, terminals that were used for interstate travel were supposed to be now integrated. So they sit down, they are arrested. And while they're in jail, they are very, very badly beaten. Now, what I remember about this is seeing Annell's picture, the photo of Annell's picture when I was first got to the Atlanta office of SNCC. And her face was just all bloated and her lips were all puffy and stuff. And they said that when they got to her, they looked at her and were so frightened by her appearance that they said, Annell, are you okay? And the only thing that comes out of these lips is freedom. Now, I thought of that when I saw Mandela come out after 26 years in prison. And I thought about the fact that he had never submitted to the injustice. They had never been able to break him. And with that, I thought about Nell Ponder and June Johnson and Uvesta Simpson. And it points out one of the important lessons of the movement, which is that those who are oppressed, as long as they continue to struggle, oftentimes become stronger than those who try to oppress them. Now, one of the things to know about Miss Hamer, though, is that she keeps going. So this happens to her in 63. She becomes an officer of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party in 1964. And we all went up, we formed according to every rule of the the DNC, the Democratic National Committee. We formed another Mississippi delegation, because the Mississippi delegation that was going to the Atlantic City, to the Democratic National Convention at that time, was all white, because they had purposely, in a lot of different ways, made sure that no black people went to the state caucuses, and certainly we couldn't vote. So we had gotten attorneys who had come down and looked at all the regulations of the DNC, and we had followed all of them, every jot and tittle, just everything according to the rules. So we go up to Atlantic City in 64, and we think that, at least we have a chance to come out of the Credentials Committee and to raise the issue of what does it mean to recognize an all-white Mississippi delegation at your National Convention, which will not even acknowledge loyalty to the Democratic Party, because they were talking about they were going to go with Goldwater. We said, we acknowledge, we will go with Lyndon Johnson. Well, in fact, it never even got out of the Credentials Committee because of a lot of political chicanery. But in any event, what happens, though, is that the delegation, the MFDP, Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party delegation, goes back to Mississippi, continues to organize, and then opens it up in 72 in terms of opening up a lot of the delegations to a lot of different kinds of people. So it wasn't for naught. But one of the things that they asked Ms. Hamer at one point was, why do you keep going? Why do you continue the struggle? And she said at one point, the only thing they could do to me was kill me. And it seemed like they'd been trying to do that a little bit at a time ever since I could remember. And then she says, we just got to stand up now as Negroes, and that could be for a lot of different groups, for ourselves and for our freedom. And if it don't do me any good, I do know the young people it will do good. Again, that sense is for those who are coming behind you. These were the kind of folks who shaped the movement. And if we don't know, it was people just like those of us in this room, like our mothers, our fathers, our teachers, our ministers, our rabbis, whatever, that if we don't know that it was those of us like us in this room, then we won't know that we can do it again, and then the other side wins. Now I'm just going to end with a quote from one of our other books. It's called Voices of Freedom, which includes a lot of narratives from the 14-hour series of Eyes on the Prize. And it's from Melba Patillo, who was one of the Little Rock Nine, one of the black high school students who integrates Central High School in 1957 in Little Rock, Arkansas. And she says, we'd be showering in gym, and someone would turn your shower into scalding. You'd be walking out to the volleyball court, and someone would break a bottle and trip you on the bottom. I have scars on my right knee from that. And after a while, I started saying to myself, am I less than human? Why do they do this to me? What's wrong with me? Because you always turn it into yourself. And so you go through stages even as a child. First you're in pain, then you're angry, then you try to fight back, and then you just don't care. You hope you do die. You hope that there's an end. And then you just mellow out and you realize that survival is day to day. And you start to grasp your own spirit. You start to grasp the depth of the human spirit. And you start to understand your own ability to cope, no matter what. And she says, that is the greatest lesson I learned. And that was also the greatest lesson that a number of us learned in the movement. And so I'll stop here, and we can either do questions or go into panel. But thank you very, very much. Thank you.